So good afternoon, hello and welcome to this wonderful Telefonica space for an event where we have three amazing writers, Mohamed El Morabet, Theodor Kallifatides and Monika Zgustova. A big round of applause for them, please. El Morabet, sorry, I said El Morabet. So I'll get started by the end, because they said that, please, in the end, say that they are going to sign the books and that they are on sale. This is an important thing, okay? Don't forget that. Their books are on sale and they will sign them for the sake of clarity. I'll repeat it if I remember, okay? But this is just to get started. So, we have three writers that have many things in common, and the works are very closely related. So this is why it is important to have them all here, thanks to the best publishing house in the world, that is Joan Tarrida, Galaxy Editor, and their editor, my editor. Big round of applause, by the way, for Joan Tarrida. Just for having this great intuition, so to speak. So, they are three transliterated writers. It's a tragic word. It's a beautiful word, but it sounds so humongous, I would say. I was looking for a word to define them, and this is what I've been able to think about. These transliterated books that say, like what the Kallifatides say in this amazing book, that is, the past is not a dream. It says that migration is a suicide. He doesn't say a tragedy, he doesn't say a bad feeling, a shame. No, he says a suicide. And I would like to get started with the three of you by that point, because I think that the three of them have experienced that suicide. They have written about it and that reborn. Right, Monika? Let's get started by you. How do you do in your last novel?
Gracias por esas presentaciones. Buenas tardes.
Thank you for these presentations. Thank you, everyone, for being here on a Friday afternoon. I see that we have a big audience here today. The truth is that for many people, or for everyone leaving their country as in exile, meaning they cannot go back to their country, because this is the way I understand exile, that you cannot go back to your country because there is a war or there is an authoritarian government. So the person who the exiled needs to remain in the host country, and I think it is a sort of suicide. And I think we could try and find other words, but probably suicide is the word that best describes the situation. I also think that all of the people who have experienced this and who are writers at the same time cannot write about anything else. I think that this exile is in each and every piece of work that I've written. Just to give you an idea of my story, my parents lived in Prague, and after the Russian invasion, which is quite a current topic, although we're dealing with another invasion from Russia in a different geographical context. And after the Russian invasion in 1968, my parents, around mid-70s, decided to leave their country and to go to the United States. And it wasn't possible to go straight to the United States, so they went to India. They asked for their visa there, and we landed in the United States, where we actually decided to cross all the borders, and it was very difficult. This was a very traumatic experience. My father used to carry a knife in his pocket just in case things didn't turn out well. But fortunately, he never had to harm himself, because we managed to cross each and every border and landed in the United States. And when we arrived there, and we had to start a new life in a language that was foreign to us, in a cultural ambience that we did not know at all. We felt like blind people. We had nothing at all. My dad knew 2 or 3 people, but we didn't know anything else beyond those 2 or 3 people. And I did the same thing more or less when I came back to Spain, but that's a different story.
Yeah. This is why this amazing title that we used to see each other before in the darkness. This is how your book is called, because the darkness was even clearer than exile, right?
Darkness was this authoritarian type of government. You can see it in a way as darkness. And with exile came many bad things, many good things too. To me, all doors were opened for me, and I am very happy that we actually went in exile. It was the best decision from my parents, and I'm very grateful and will always be grateful for their decision. But it's true that I suppose that later we will deal with languages, how we lost our language, but for my parents, they saw a great loss. For instance, my mum lost the languages. The languages that she knew, she couldn't use in the United States, and many other things were lost in the way. But at the same time, when you're open to learning things and to absorbing new things, you get more than what you leave behind.
In fact, that procedure takes with it some kind of translanguaging, so to speak. It's a made-up word, okay? So you need to learn other language, and you need to write in another language, like Theodor, for example. And he had to learn Swedish in order to write in Swedish. And you described, Theodor, this lack of language and that exile as a rabbit, so to speak, like a skinned rabbit, and he needs to learn how to wear another skin again, and this new skin is another language, right?
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. Yes, it was a very difficult situation, because I say it's a partial death to leave your country. But of course it depends. I was 25 years old. I had all the experiences that a man of my age has. I had been in love, I had been studying, I have been haunted by the police, I have been imprisoned, I have been beaten, I was unemployed, and it was my first job in Athens was to sell the newspaper for the blind people, and the first house I knocked to sell the newspaper for the blind people was a blind couple, and they said, well, you come to wrong clients, and that was the end of my career as a sailor, So coming to Sweden, I was not in any sense feeling that I would leave myself into the misery of emigration. I had an idea about what I wanted to do. My idea was very simple. It has been practiced by all Greeks since antiquity. that they leave their country. The idea was to learn the language, not only to get a work, but also to be able to express yourself, to be a decent human being, that you can declare your love to a person, you can pray to your God, and you can sing to the new language. That was the idea. And but to do that, the price was to forget about the past. I could not cope with the two words at the same time. So for a period of 3 to 4 years, I was living totally within the Swedish language. And since the education back then, in the beginning of 60s, was rather bad, I was learning the language by taking long walks, picking up words from the windows. You see a shirt and it says shirt, and you see shoes and it says realization. So I went into a soup store to buy a realization, and I did not succeed with that. but I have a belief that learning is a many-sided process. You learn with your head, but you learn also with your body, because the reality has a language. The vitrines of the businesses is a language. The way houses are built is a language. And I thought if I let this language come into my body, that would make possibly for me to write into this new country. Now the decision to write was not really a decision, it was rather an accident. I started thinking in Swedish words, and all of a sudden verses of Swedish dropped into my head like rain, not intentional. I just hit it. I was hit by some verses, and I noted them down. And after a while, I had some pages, and I put these pages together, and I sent it to the hugest and most important edition house of Sweden. And I thought, well, nothing will happen with that. But I was wrong, because 3 days later I got a letter. Young men come by the office, will write a contract. And all of a sudden I was a writing person. I have been writing since I was a boy. It was my way to write, but writing Swedish was a different thing. And what is the difficulty to write in a new language? Well, it is a difficulty that the new reality is a new language. I mean, you cannot, there is a Greek death, there is a Swedish death, there is a Spanish death, and although all of us are dead, the death is different, the sorrow is different, the expression is different. I remember once I on an island, isolated island, I found the graves of some Russian soldiers who were dead there during a war between Russia and Sweden at that time, and they were quite different. I had a very different idea, perception of their death. It was a different death. It was a Russian death. And I said, well, I cannot write about Sweden and the Swedish reality in other language than the Swedish language. And so I went on trying and reading and I have never stopped actually try to every an important problem is that the language change, and you know that very well, of course, and Monika knows that. You come to a country, work means work. All of a sudden, work is not work any longer, but the word is said to mean working with your relationships. I mean, what do? We have 8-hour work with our marriage. Okay, fine. This is a work. And the work loses here the value it had. It's employment. Somebody without work is not a non-working person or without work. He is a person without employment. And first, you don't understand what really means employment. And all of a sudden, you must live your life with new terms. And it changes all the time. You speak about divorce, for example, but the word divorce disappears and it gets another meaning. It's winning your liberty as a woman or as a man, and so on. And you have to follow all this, the process of language. And I find this is the most difficult part, because unfortunately the process of language is not a normal one. New language come inside, the new English, Arab. I mean, in Sweden now there are very many Arab words, which kids from Arab families, they speak both Arab and Swedish, but between them they speak Arab. And the Swedish boys and girls pick up the words. And that goes on. Yalla yalla. I never heard the word yalla, but I learned it. It means come, huh? Yeah, yalla. Or how the girl is called, and so on. And it means that you have to understand the new language. Means to be a member of the new society. And this is sometimes this is very hard, because although we speak about equality and about we're not racist and so on, no, it's not that easy. If you're black, you're black. Everybody can see it. And if there is a white man there, he comes first. All over the world. No question about that.
Bueno, todas estas cosas que...
Well, so all these things that Theodor is talking about are included in an amazing book that is Another Life to Live. That is the first book that we knew about him in Spanish. And there are great reflections about what he has said. The past is not a dream, or now in Timandra. That is the new one, and I'm sure that Mohamed, that was next to him thinking and nodding his head, I'm sure that he knows what the translanguaging is and what we've been talking about, and that Theodor was saying he knows about that great sea that is half-breed language, so to speak, because Spanish is an Arab language, it's a Latin Israel language, so to speak. So some kind of mix, a central mix that came from Latin language, but was totally pregnant with marvelous Arab words. And in the Miothate poem, we can see that, how this became into in Spanish, Castilian Spanish, Catalan, Valencian, Catalan from Mallorca. I mean, that big bang that happened then. What are your reflections about this translanguaging? Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Well, by the way, you've been awarded with the Malaga Prize. Thanks to this great book, The Winter of Goldfinches. Yeah, thank you. Well, just to get started, I would have to say that I come from Alhucemas. I was born in Alhucemas. It's a city that is in the north of Morocco, and my mother language, the first language that I spoke, is Ruthenium, that is a variant of Amazigh from Berber. And the first thing is the first language that my mother and my grandmother used to use with me. And when later on I discovered how, for example, when they said that I was their little chick, it was like, well, that's amazing. But when I discovered how a chick was, it's like, well, my grandma is using metaphors and she's using them with me. So to me, this language is an oral language. I didn't have the possibility. Well, in Morocco, it's being taught, but I can only speak Ruthenium and Amazigh. I didn't have the possibility of learning about it. This was the first contact with this first language. This is to explain the process of this translanguaging process. The second contact was with Spanish, with the Spanish television, with cartoons. And when I was 5, I went to school, and I had my first contact with classic Arab, and with 6 years old with French. We could say that when I was 6 years old, I could count in 4 languages until 32. That was the number of grandchildren that my grandmother had. So this is the language mix in which I grew up. We spoke in Amazigh. I watched Spanish television. I went to school. I studied in Arabic and French. And these 2 languages, Arabic and French, I have to say, these languages were learned not to speak in them, but to write in. I'm in touch with them through books, but Spanish was amazing because I watched it on television, and Amazigh was the present on the streets, etc. And this on the one hand. So this language mix is with me, and this is nothing extraordinary. I mean, this is the Spanish thing. This was with me until I was 19, when I came to Madrid. And suddenly these voices switch off, because the language that is spoken in Madrid is really similar to the one that I listened to at the university and the one that I listened to on TV, and it's quite similar to the one that I read on books. To me, this was a great new adventure, because suddenly I see myself in front of a language that, well, it has nuances and specific aspects, but they are really similar to each other, and it is in the development of my day-to-day life. The relationship with the Spanish later on helped me stay focused and to deep dive in the language, to try to learn it better, to try to improve in it, etc. And the later relationship to writing it was an accident too, because there was a time, well, when I was thinking about what language should I write in, I started to have some literature ambition, so to speak, but when I sat down and started to write, I knew that I had to write in Spanish. I've loved the Kallifatides anecdote when he says that he's going to ask for a shirt and he asked for a jumper because I think that I couldn't pronounce well. I said I want to have a half kilo of tenderness instead of steak. It's a play on words in Spanish. They are 2 very similar words, and they create this bond, this love bonds among each other. But it's a very long process. It's a process in which you need to be aware of. But it's true that my relationship with the Spanish, with Castilian Spanish, is promiscuous relationship, I would say. I have a promiscuous relationship with language that aspires to be a love relationship. Yeah, that's it, what it has to be. You have to be, of course, you have to have a promiscuous relationship. Amazing. Well, now you've messed up my head, by the way, with so many languages, and well, that's amazing. You're really lucky. And I also envy Monika's experience, because I know what it is to be Czech and to speak Polish, Russian, and English and French and Slovakian in order to be able to live in this world. But let's go to the roots of all this, because in Monika's book there's something that I've been talking to Theodor about before, and this is that culture, the Greek culture, is really deep and really powerful because it's a written culture. So in correlation, in relation to Riffian, that is an oral language, and related to the view that Monika had about her father, thanks to Greek mythology, and Theodor said that when in this dramatic moments that are a great chance, in this exile moments, deeply everything that emerges is culture, the fact of feeling attached to culture. This saved you, Monika, in some way, when you left everything behind? I mean, did you leave a culture to get into another one, and did you get in touch with it?
Yes, I believe that's the way it was. I was lucky in the sense that I came from a very literate, very intellectual family. And aside of what you said, being in touch in the school with 2 or 3 languages at school, Czech, Slovakian, and so we heard this on the TV, on the radio, so it was half Czech and half Slovakian. So we were absolutely used to dealing with several languages. And we also studied Russian. It was the enemy's language and the invaders' language. And most of the teachers did not teach Russian very well because they wanted to keep a distance with this language. But for me, it was a language, it was a culture, and I was interested in it because I came from an environment, my dad was a linguist, and the house was full of books in all languages, especially in dead languages. My dad spoke more dead languages than living or current languages, and some of them he actually spoke them very fluently, which is Latin. I think it's the only one that you can actually speak, and he was one of the few experts who spoke Latin. So when we arrived at the United States, we did not speak English, that's true, but when you already speak other languages, my dad spoke English, but his English was not the one you could hear on the streets. He didn't understand anyone. And the rest of us, the rest of the family, did not speak even a word of English. So it was quite a terrible situation. For instance, I remember that when we arrived in New York, I wanted to ask what time it was to somebody. And the person did not only understand me, but this person wasn't even eager to stop and talk to me. And I understand this now, because it's like coming from a rural area, arriving in a big city, and they don't understand anything about the big city. We were absolutely lost there. And we started learning English more slowly, faster. And before speaking English, I learned Russian because I wanted to read in a language. And there were many books in Russian available in the library, so my first step in the United States was to improve my Russian. My second step was to start studying Hindi, because since we went through India, I was impressed by the Indian culture, so I also started studying Hindi and Sanskrit, and obviously English as well. And about a year and a half later, I read my first book in English. And the truth is that when I start writing now, English is a language that comes to my mind, as Spanish or Czech or Catalan, they all come to my mind.
Lenguas es, oye.
So, a writer in 4 languages, I mean, you need to be proud of it. And a very good writer, by the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eso de que la cultura nos falta, nos salva, ¿estás seguro?
Theodor, when you were speaking about we have a lack of culture and that it saves us, are you sure about that?
I'm afraid, yes. Well, when we are born, we don't inherit anything from our parents. We may have the most wonderful parents, kind or educated. We don't get nothing of that. What we get is hair, arms, feet, and so on, which means that basically every human being has to begin from the very beginning. You have to learn it all over again. You have to learn that love can hurt. You have to learn that to be a good person is not that easy, and sometimes it's also against you. You have to understand people. You have to learn to understand people. You have to look at Mohamed or at me and see that we are human beings. The first years in Stockholm, I was complaining often that they do not look at me as if I'm a human being. And a friend poet, said to me, well, you can be happy that they don't look at you as you were a reindeer. You see, we have to begin from the very beginning, and this is not easy. Now, where can a child learn something about life or about humanity? It's culture. There is no any other source. We have all the main experiences of human beings. We have them. We have them either in poems, in pictures, in plays or movies or whatever. They are there. I'm sure that if somebody reads, for example, Tolstoy, Peace and War, he will never start a war, because then he will know what it is. Now they don't. Children do not know actually what war is, so they start a war. So the usual thing in Europe, and it is all over Europe, is that politics dictate the cultural life of a country. Meanwhile, it should be the opposite. It should be politics that dictate. It should be culture which dictate politics. It should be the common goods, peace, health, security. These are the goals that we should all try, and we would if we were more reading, more thinking, more cultural persons than we actually are. And how this will change, I don't know. I see all cultures becoming violent. Greece, Iran, Iraq, they are very old cultures, and they have forgotten everything. They have forgotten everything about war. They have been fighting for 3,000 years and they have learned nothing. So, but still, we don't have any other source of growing as human beings but culture.
So you think, Theodor, that Putin hasn't read Peace and War, or maybe he hasn't understood it properly? Maybe he didn't understand it.
I mean, the question is not to read Tolstoy, because probably he has done, but it is to understand him also. That's a different question. And you see, we have a world where Putin is also, I'm sorry to say, it's also a victim of his own ideas. Because after all, whatever it happens, this war will not benefit anyone, including Putin. Nothing is going to be gained out of this war, but still they do it. Why? Because they have a set of ideas: bravery, machismo, my country, your country, my people, and so on and so forth. All these false notions that inevitably lead to war. I was surprised to hear from the Persian writer that if a Persian, I don't know if it's true, but that I would talk. If a Persian wants to insult somebody, another Persian, he says, "You are an Arab." I mean, the worst thing you can be for Persian, is it true?
Puede ser, sí.
Yeah, well, okay.
Can be.
But Arab, what is an Arab? It is one of the greatest civilizations we have seen. But they also forget it. So, I insist on that. We have no other way but to educate ourselves, to understand and value the things we should know, and they are being said by the writers and poets, and they are there for us to pick them up. We don't do it. Actually, it is the contrary. The normal education in the European school nowadays is not human. It's humanistic. It's economics, business, how to get money, how to get richer, and things like that, or to cook food or things, but not how to become a better human being.
This mention that Theodor always says about chauvinism as one of, as a disgrace, so to speak, that makes you think that you're better than someone or not. This feel of superiority, I guess, Mohamed, that you have already solved that with you, right? Yeah, but it makes me remind an anecdote that is quoted by Todorov in an amazing book that is called Fear to Barbarians. By the way, it's quoted in Galaxia. We can't quote any more titles, by the way. Well, I love this story. Todorov says that Greeks divided between us and the others, all the strangers, all the people from abroad were barbarians, and they were because of the language, because they didn't speak Greek, or maybe they didn't understand it, or they were not good at speaking it. So if they could not speak good Greek, or if they didn't understand it, that was a barbarian, until Strabon came along and using an ethnography treaty by Aristophanes, I think, Strabon said, hey, so the barbarians, if we don't speak someone else's language, we are barbarians for those, right? So he turned the story around, and eureka! There was a huge world of possibilities in front of them. And in that book, Todorov says something amazing. According culture, fear to barbarians is what can make can make us become into barbarians. The fear of not accepting the others, not being sympathetic with the others, of not accepting not accepting them as they are, not to speak. That's the biggest threat that can make us become into barbarians. And we are seeing this in the war that we are seeing, and in so many wars that we have in the world right now. But it's true that the contingency of the use in culture as the only way to become brothers and sisters, as equals, as is different, well, this is through culture, and that's very clear for me. I totally agree with Theodor in this. So this is this half-breed table that we have here, so to speak. You said he turned the story around. Well, he has used a Spanish expression, and eureka, that's a Greek term. So we have moved from a taste to philosophy in just a couple of sentences. Congratulations, by the way. So great. So culture as a saving piece. So seeing what's going on, Monika, I mean that you need to. It has to be scary, right? Seeing what's happening in our borders right now, right?
Yes, the truth is that I went through a similar situation when I was a kid, a Russian invasion in Prague, and I was a kid. But I remember very clearly what happened, because it's something that you can never forget. Sometimes you awake at night and you see the tanks going down the street, and you are awakened by this big loud noise, and you see all these tanks rolling down the street, and my parents were already awake, and they explain that it's the Russian coming to invade our country, that want to crush Prague Spring in 1968. And I even saw one of my classmates who wanted to stop a tank, and you don't stop a tank if you're a child. So what happened in Prague was serious. But what we are seeing right now is a tragedy that cannot compare with anything that I have seen in my life. I can't believe this is actually happening right now. The truth is that personally, I've always thought that Putin was a very dangerous man, that he was up to no good. I wasn't the only one to think this. About 10 years ago, I went to Russia to interview women who had spent time in the Gulag, which is a sort of exile, women who were there to carry out forced labor. And I heard about the experiences of 9 women. I wrote about a book called Dressed for a Dance in the Snow. And what I wanted to remember here today is that all these women, younger, elder, told me that Putin was an extremely dangerous person. Those who lived outside of Russia told me that they did not want to go back to Russia, that they were selling their properties because they did not want to go back to Putin's Russia, which was a country where there was a dictator, because they could clearly see that he was a dictator. People did say that he had not become a dictator, that he had always been a dictator. It was 15 years ago when he was already murdering people, and now he is fulfilling his dreams. And we cannot forget all the massacres that he has undertaken and caused around the world, and now he's doing the same thing at the doors of Europe to threaten us all, and unfortunately he is managing to threaten us all.
So you've been speaking about this for years in amazing books like The Dress for Dance in the Snow. I recommend this book because it's amazing. You've been warning us about this, and it is time that you take the floor, because I have many more things to ask them. But I would like to give the floor to the audience for you to raise your hands and to ask anything you want. So come on, don't be shy. Do we have any questions? There, we have a question back there.
Buenas tardes. Quiero preguntar.
Good evening. I would like to ask you something. I come from abroad. I live here in Spain, and I also write in Spanish. But when I write in Spanish, I have a problem because I never know if what I'm writing is well written, because I usually send this to someone, and he says, no, you have to correct this and that, and after that I give that this manuscript to someone else, and he says, no, that's not Spanish. So I have a great mess. I mean, I don't know if I'm a good writer in Spanish or not. So I totally understand you. I mean, to realize, I mean, if you're aware that you don't know whether it's good or bad, it's a good starting point. I share that feeling with you. I've been writing in Spanish for quite a long time, and I have two feelings that are with me temporarily. One feeling is temporarily, I would say. In every sentence I can go down a cliff, for example, and at the same time I have this feeling of feeling weird, to be an intruder, an imposter, undercovered. I mean, these two feelings make me be in front of the mirror of my fragility, and being aware of my fragility is the only way of writing something that can be worth to read. So if you don't feel secure, to me it's a good time to keep on writing, I would say. And what about you, Theodor? What do you think? Have you had such experience?
What was it?
Que si te sientes cuando preguntaba él que he asked that he writes in Spanish, although his language is in English, and he doesn't know whether he does it good or bad, and people when he gives it to correct, people tells him, you have to correct this, you have to correct that. It's just such a mess for him. He finds himself always lost in this.
Yeah, well, it's part of being a writer to be criticized, and you must be open to this process. But I know. I mean, my closest critic is my wife. I ask her, "Is this right?" No, she says, "No, this is not right." And she's Swedish, and I'm Greek. But we still manage. I mean, we keep learning. We keep learning from each other. But it is, I understand the difficulty, I understand very well the difficulties, and it has to do also that the language changes. Mohamed said an example earlier about barbar. Well, you are perfectly right, but the word barbar did not exist really, and the ancient Greeks by barbar did not mean barbarous. They meant somebody who did not speak Greek. That was that.
Exacto.
Yeah. But then it became, yeah, it became how it became. And you see this thing happen every day. Words change, difficulties, and you never know what will happen in the future. I'll tell you a story. When the man who defeated America, both American and French in Vietnam, I don't recall his name, no Ho Chi Minh, his general, he was visiting Paris. And the journalists there, they asked him, well, what is your opinion about the French Revolution? He thought for a while and then he said, it's too early to say. So it's the same thing with language. You say a word, you never know where it will end. Things change all the time. And this is really a problem. And also we have now a phenomenon which did not exist that much before. Some one or two languages take the hegemony of the world. I mean, it's very probable that...
Esto es nuevo, sí.
Yeah, this is new, that's right.
100 years will not exist Swedish literature or Greek literature. All will be written in English or some kind of English. Or maybe Hindu, I don't know which one will be, but it goes that way. Mm-hmm. And it's a pity because this will lead to the loss of serious experiences.
Sí, nos hará más pobres.
It will make us poorer, yeah. But that's the process of writing. I mean, that's the process, as our kind spectator was saying. He had this stopped, but this is the process of writing. I mean, although you write this in your mother language, you won't be sure whether it's good or not. Although if they say that it's going to be, that it's right, you won't be sure about it. Although you see it published in a book, you will have that certainty of whether it's good or bad.
But it's different. It's somewhat different when it's a language that is not your own language. I can compare this with some books that I write in Czech and some in Spanish. So I started translating, and translation for me was very important because I did what the other way around than what most people do. I started translating from my mother tongue to a language that was not my native tongue. And I was even so daring, I got so daring that I even translated from Russian into Spanish, none of which are my mother tongues. This is very daring and sort of a very complicated mix. But when I write in Czech, when I have a page written in Czech in front of me, I can see what I need to correct, what changes I need to make. Whereas when I read something that I have just written in Spanish, it doesn't come out so clear for me. It's sort of a labyrinth, and I want to show it to somebody else so that they can tell me something about it. But at the same time, I am very fearful. I fear that they tell me that this is terrible, and they tell me to work in other language because this is not good enough. So I work and work and work over the same text, and only at the end do I show it to somebody else. Because I suppose that all of you are aware of this feeling that when you have a half-written text and you think that definitely not talented at all, this is hideous, and only once that you've worked on it for a long time, and only when you have the last version, the last correction, then you start thinking, it might not be so bad after all. But I think that having all these doubts is very important, and for any creator, I believe the worst thing that they can do is to feel too safe in any sort of terrain, any sort of domain.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes you enjoy more correcting than writing, or writing down. That's a process, but there are more questions, I'm sure. Yeah, this way. Here.
Hola, gracias.
Hi, thank you to the four of you for sharing this experience with us. I have read your books, Monika, Silent Roses, and I have also read Mohamed, and I am very curious about the way that you experience your relationship with the language that you leave behind, or that the language that is not such a protagonist in what you're writing. The connection with one language, in my mind, is always in detriment with the connection you have with a different one, as if we didn't have the time to get deep in all the nuances, in all the different aspects that one language entails. So I wonder if for you, in order to embrace one of these languages, you need to renounce somehow to another language, and if this is sort of a mourning as well.
Entiendo un poco español, hablo un poco español.
I understand a little bit of Spanish.
What was the question? No,
Dale el micrófono, pregúntale.
El micro.
Give the lady a mic so she can,
Hi.
Sorry.
Yes, Theodor. No, it's perfectly fine. It's good. So I was wondering how much of a loss it means for your previous language. Like when you embrace a new language to that extent of richness, complexity, nuances, does this mean somehow letting go of the other language, or somehow losing it or grieving it? For me, from my personal experience, embracing a new language has come at the expense of crying the loss of the previous one. I don't know if it's the case for you guys.
Well, yes, I understand now. Well, usually I have heard a lot of opinions about losing your identity, you've changed the language, and I have been present when a Russian writer in a conference said that there writers that write in another language than their mother language are pigs, and such pigs happily do not exist. And then it was my turn to speak, and I thanked him because it made it clear to me that I did not exist. But I think this is a kind of exactly the ideas I'm working against, this kind of absolutism about some values. I'm the same person speaking or writing Swedish, and maybe some nuances disappear, but I win new nuances. There are very many things I can say better in Swedish than I can say in Greek. For example, why? Because in Swedish, if you say no, you mean usually no. But if you say no in Greece, you can mean yes, almost yes, you never know. So you see, they say we fought for democracy to establish a dictatorship. The fight for democracy was to establish a dictatorship. I mean, so you understand what I'm talking about? It's a total confusion, and at the same time, the Swedish language gave me something I never had, and I would never have in my own, because the Swedish language is very, very concrete. The Greek language is full of abstract terms. We were talking with Jesus about a nice term of Aristoteles, misalodoxia, which does not exist in any other language, because it's not to be fanatic, it's not to be patriotic, it's to simply hate the other person's opinions. I have nothing against you, but I hate your opinions. So, it's a very civilized word, but they cannot use it any longer. If you hate his opinions, the same as to hate him. It's not, says Aristotle. It's not. No, anyway, and the Swedish language is a very concrete language, and I won some new values for my literature, writing more directly, writing more down the point, and saying things I would never have said before. For example, that if you look at the heart of a Swedish man, you will find a screwer, and these are jokes, but those jokes I never had if I wrote only Greek. And I said the jokes now. I have earned other things too. And in general, I think that my colleagues here, to know more language is an enrichment, and in any possible words. Now, which language you decide to write? Well, I suppose that Monika would write in Greek if she lived in Greece for 20 years, and Mohamed would write also in Greek if he was in Greece, and I would write in Arab if I was in an Arabic country. If you want to write, this is the main thing. If you want to have a show about how clever you are in your language, well, then go to the circus. But if you want to write a book, you write it in any language you can if you have something to say. I usually say, if you have something to say, you can say it in all language you know. If you have nothing to say, you say it better in your mother tongue. And this is most of literature. This is most of literature.
Mohamed, ¿querías decir algo?
Mohamed, did you want to say something? Yeah, I totally agree with Theo. And you, Monika?
Yes, I would like to add something. I believe that each case is different. To answer this question that we've been asked, there are some authors who really embrace and focus in the language in which they write. In my case, if I write in Spanish, I try to write in my best Spanish. I read a lot, but I try not to lose the Czech that I speak at all. I've always been in touch with the Czech language because I've translated greatly from the Czech. And of course, it was like being in touch with my mother tongue on a daily basis. So to translate great classics such Harabal or Kundera, Havel, gives you such a good learning experience. And all these authors are running through my veins at the moment. And when I write in Czech, I know that a little piece of what I have learned with this is on the pages that I write as well, which makes sense. And I would like to share with you some little thing that happened to me last year. The book that we mentioned before, Dressed for a Dance in the Snow, was translated from Spanish into Czech, and it was a different translator. It wasn't myself, it had to be done quickly for different reasons, for editorial reasons, in a Prague publishing house. And I was sent the copies of the translation made by somebody else, but who had written in Spanish too. And I didn't recognize my book. I usually write in Czech, but this was a totally different use of the language. And I was trying to read it and correct it, and I was correcting so much that I had to rewrite it. And I said to myself, no, this cannot go on. Let them do whatever they want, because I would rewrite it completely, and I couldn't do this. So in the end, nobody realized this had happened, just me.
There was a question there. There are a couple of questions. It will be the last one because we have to leave. There's one there. Yeah, there.
Gracias, ha estado muy...
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. My question is very brief. I just wanted to ask Monika and Mohamed what they thought of the capacity of the verbs to be, the both translations it has. In other languages, this is just one single verb, like in English, and in Spanish, it's two words.
I don't know. I'm happy, and I'm happy. This is the both senses that this verb has in Spanish. The verb to be. It's a little bit messy for me. I have to be honest with you, with both meanings. But the truth is that I've never thought about it. Yeah, I note it down. I'm going to think about it. Monika.
Well, I think that's the example that Mohamed gave you is a very good example. Some of these words, when you say, for instance, I am, or I am at this moment, it entails a different meaning, obviously, in Spanish, and I believe that this sort of adds to the meaning. However, I don't find it the most difficult aspect of the Spanish language. To me, the most difficult thing are verbs. For instance, the verb, the fact that the verb changes when you say, I have come here, and you're meaning that you came here today, and you say you came here a week ago, because in some languages you don't see there's this difference.
So the point is, for example, who I owe to and who owes me. I never know whether someone owes something to me or if I owe someone something to someone. I'll clarify it for you later. I always have a doubt that mortifies me. What if Shakespeare meant to be or not to be in the second sense that this verb has in Spanish? I've never been able to figure this out. There's a question there. Yeah, it's a very specific question. After listening to your great contributions, I understand that the ideal world, the ideal thing would be that every writer should speak only in his mother language, and every reader should be able to read every single language. I mean, things that have been written in these languages. If this would be the case, it was God's fault. It was God's fault. Yeah, we wouldn't be here. That's a little bit far away for me. So, if that's the question, why do you think that if they tried to create a common language like Esperanto failed? Oh, that's quite boring. No, it would be boring just to speak one language. No, the question is amazing. The question is amazing. So, why did Esperanto failed? And why God had this thing of, well, the attempt of trying to reach a perfect language failed. Humankind has been chasing it for 3,000 years. There's an amazing book by Umberto Eco that is called The Search of the Perfect Language, where he breaks this down in the European context. And there were people that has tried to create this language. In fact, people have devoted many years or even centuries to set up a language that could be spoken by everybody. But this is what Theodor Kallifatides was saying. This is the death of culture. This would be the death of difference. It's like, wow, the world would be very boring if we all spoke the same language, and if we all understood ourselves in the same language. The good thing is that we don't understand ourselves, and we make an effort to understand ourselves. That's the beautiful thing of living, anyway, I would say. Monika and Theodor?
I think that Mohamed expressed it very well.
I'm in deep trouble because the translation is very nice, but I hear your voices and I hear English here, and well, I think you are talking about my problem right now all the time.
No, ahora sí que estás respondiendo toda la pregunta muy bien.
No, seriously, I understand what Mohammed says, because I had all that kind of thing with my own children. For one thing, no teacher could say the name of the children. My son was known as Marco Al-Khalif, because they could not learn to say Kallifatides. Marco Al-Khalif, yeah. And my daughter was called the one with the long name.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and there
How is she called?
Yeah.
What's her name? What's her name?
Kallifatides.
Okay. No, I thought that the first name.
Johanna Kallifatides. And I remember especially after a match for handball, the boy, my son, was pointed to the best player of that match, but they could not say his name, and said the best player of the match is the best player. What the hell is that? And then we knew who was the best player. So it's a kind of sad stories, this. But I think, to be honest, I think that we are so used to our language that we don't listen when somebody speaks another language. Even if we know the language, we don't really care. We arrive to the conclusion that he is talking nonsense because he is not speaking our language. And this is not, of course, always the case, but it's very often. If somebody starts to speak and people notice that, well, he's not so sure, he's searching for words, and so, they lose interest. And they think it's no worth of the trouble. And it happens all the time. And it happens also in between whole countries. One country hates another country, which for me is not only stupid, but I cannot understand how is it possible. The whole Greece to hate the whole Albanian, for example. How is it that possible? But we manage somehow. Anyway, I would like to because Monika was talking so much about Chekhov. He's one of my favorite writers, all categories. And when he died, Maxim Gorky gave a speech which you certainly know. And he said that a thing which has been kind of Bible for me. He said, Chekhov was a gentleman, and he came to us and said, gentlemen, we live our lives badly. Can we discuss what to do about it? If we had that Chekhov tone, even here, it would be another reality. It would be another world. Gentlemen, can we discuss what can we do to get better, instead of
Monika.
Bueno, mientras
In the meantime, I've thought that the problem with Esperanto and other such languages is that they are dead languages, they are not alive. And I think that the difference between any living language, no matter how difficult it is to learn, we learn it with eagerness because it's life. But that sort of language does not come out from anything. It's just like a mental calculation. It's an imposed idea, and I think this is why they've never been successful.
Yeah, that's the artificial thing. Maybe that's the key, that it's not natural, it's artificial. And all the artificial things, unless a Telefónica algorithm considers that this is an illusion, well, just to wrap up, I would like to say, thank you. A big round of applause, please.
Y muchísimas gracias.
And thank you very much to you all for coming along. Thank you. Have a very good weekend.